How can you find the one? Well, in this episode, we're going to talk about the idea of soulmates, how to find the one, and how you can know that somebody is right to marry. Hi, my name is David Cipriano. I'm a youth pastor, and my goal here is to teach the Bible and to help you follow Jesus. So a little bit about me. I've been married for over 4 years now, and I've been together with my now wife for over 7 years. So I for sure don't know everything about this topic, but we're going to be focusing on biblical principles for relationships, dating, and marriage. And these are principles I've applied to my life and my relationship, and I trust that they will help you as well. You know, as a youth pastor, I feel especially concerned about this topic because for many people, they make the most important decision of their lives outside of salvation as a teenager. And I think that really as a society, we're very educated about relationships, but we're miseducated because we hear a lot of advice and we talk about these topics a lot, but it's often bad advice. And I think that especially for Christians, we need to be focusing on these biblical principles and what the Bible says. And that's what we're going to be doing in this episode. We're going to talk about biblical truths, how the Bible fits into our lives, and just simply what works. But first, I want to talk about the idea or the concept of a soulmate. You see, the idea of a soulmate is that for every person, there's another person out there in the world who is a perfect fit for you. And if you marry anybody other than this soulmate, then you'll never be happy. So it's a belief that there's one person in the world designed for you, and that if you find them, then you'll be happy. But if you don't, then you can't be happy. And that there's only one person in all of the world who is absolutely perfect and made just for you. And something that I recently learned is that this concept of a soulmate actually comes from ancient Greek mythology. See, according to Greek mythology, there was once a time when humans were whole, when we had 4 arms, 4 legs, 2 faces, and 1 soul. But out of fear of the humans' power, Zeus, who was the king of the gods, split the humans in half. And that as a result, we now have 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 face, and half a soul. And that every complete person was split in half so that everybody was just half of a person. And after the humans had been split, they were filled with despair, loneliness, and longing. And the only way for humans to be complete and whole again was to find their soulmate. Because everybody has just half a soul, and you have to find that missing half. So it's the idea that there's only one person in the world for you and that you can't be happy unless you somehow find them. And this seems to be how many people view relationships. They think that they can't possibly be happy without the one. They think that in the entire world, there's only one person who could be right and who could make you happy. And outside of the fact that the concept of soulmates comes from Greek mythology, I think that there's some other practical reasons why I don't believe in them and why soulmates are not a biblical concept. You see, if all of us were assigned one soulmate and we couldn't be happy with anybody else, then you would really have to get insanely lucky to find that person. Because what if that person lived in a different time period? What if you're living in 2024, but your soulmate lived in 1024? What if that person married the wrong person? Well, that just stinks for you because you could never be happy because of no fault of your own. What if one of you passes away before you ever meet each other? What if one of you was miscarried or was involved in some freak accident? You see, what I'm trying to say here is that if the concept of soulmates were true, then you would have to get incredibly lucky and have so many things go exactly right for you to be able to find them. Now, maybe you disagree with me about my position on soulmates, and maybe you're thinking to yourself that God wouldn't let those things happen. Like God wouldn't let your soulmate marry the wrong person, He wouldn't let them die, He wouldn't let you not be able to meet each other. And so maybe you think that soulmates are a real concept because God's going to perfectly align your life. And I get where you're coming from here, and I think that this is what many Christians believe, but I don't really see see any evidence to suggest that God doesn't allow bad things to happen. And this isn't a criticism on God. No, God is a good God. He's a loving God. He is a sovereign God. But God allows bad things to happen. And so I don't see any reason to believe that soulmates are a real thing and that God's just going to perfectly align every single thing so that everything right happens so that you can meet this person. I don't see that evidence in life. I don't see that evidence in the Bible. Philosophically, I can't think of reasons why that would happen. And so I don't think that we should say God wouldn't let that happen because I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that. And I think that another problem with this idea is that people believe that there is only one person who can complete them and make them happy, meaning that they can't be content while they're single, meaning that they can't be happy while they're waiting for God to introduce them to that person. And I think that as a result of this idea of soulmates, some people will be with somebody that they disagree with. Maybe they have an argument with them. Maybe that other person has a bad day. And as a result of a problem, they'll just conclude that that person isn't their soulmate. And I think that the concept of soulmates basically requires perfection from the other person. And I think that this idea keeps people single longer than they should be because they expect perfection, so they can't accept imperfection. And sometimes if there's just one issue, then they will conclude that that other person must not be the one who completes them. I think that another problem with soulmates is that it's mostly based on feelings and emotions. And if we're just being real, sometimes feelings aren't always going to be there. Feelings can go up and down. Our emotions change every single day. And even when those things happen, you still need to be faithful to that person. And I think that whenever people prioritize feelings and emotions above everything else, that's why they have affairs. That's why they break up with people. That's why many relationships don't work out. And so your relationship shouldn't just be built on feelings and emotions. So I do not believe in the idea of there being one soulmate for you. And I kind of want to back up on that because on one hand, I do think that God has a plan for your life. And yet the Bible also shows that God gives us choices. God seems to give us multiple options. And I think that there's some Bible verses that confirm that. In 1 Corinthians 7:39, Paul here is giving instructions about remarriage, and it says the wife is bound by the husband as long as her husband liveth, but if her husband be dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord. So if this woman is remarrying, then it says that she is at liberty to be married to whom she will. So she is free to have a choice. But notice here that it says only in the Lord. So while the Bible does show that we have options for our future spouse, it needs to be according to God's will, meaning that you shouldn't marry the wrong person. You shouldn't marry an unbeliever. You shouldn't marry somebody who's not living for God. And so while there can be multiple options and multiple possibilities, that doesn't just justify any marriage or any relationship. In Proverbs 18:22, the Bible says, "Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing, and obtaineth favor of the Lord." Now, I don't want to stretch this verse or to twist it or take it out of context and try to make it say something that it doesn't say, but the verse says, "a wife," not trying to say the only one who could possibly complete you, but just simply a wife. And obviously that doesn't mean just any wife, but it implies that there are multiple options. Similarly, Proverbs 31:10 says, "Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies." And so in these verses, the Bible is not saying the wife or the virtuous woman, but simply a wife, a virtuous woman. Now, I want to be very clear in what I'm saying here because I am definitely not saying that you can just marry anybody and it will be fine. And I'm also not saying that God doesn't have a plan for your life. But I think that the Bible clearly shows us that whenever it comes to our future spouse, we have some choices. And the Bible gives us some guidelines for finding that person. Now, in my youth group, we recently did a series talking about relationships, and I had the teenagers ask questions. And one of the questions that we received was, does God choose who we marry, or is that our decision? Well, on one hand, I think that God has a plan for your life. God orders our steps. God has a will that he wants for you to follow. And I think that personally, I believe that God's plan for me was to marry the woman that I married. And you're not marrying multiple people. We're not polygamists. So in a sense, there's only one person for you. And whenever you marry that person, then they're definitely the one. And they're the only one. So on one hand, God has a plan for your life. But on the other hand, God gives us options. And I think that there are multiple people who could be right. And again, this doesn't apply if you're already married, but if you're single and you're trying to figure out who your future spouse should be, I don't think that you have to overcomplicate it and say that there's only one person in the entire world who could possibly be right. And so whenever we have the question, does God choose who we marry, or is that our decision? I think that the answer is both. Because God has a will for your life and he has a plan for you, but we make a choice. We have a free will and we can obey God or disobey God. And while I don't think that there's only one person in the entire world who could possibly be right, there definitely are still some guidelines and some principles that we need to follow. Saying that there are multiple people who could be right is not saying that everybody could be right. And so God might have a plan for your life and he might give you some options, but we have to choose to follow him. You know, outside of your salvation, the person that you marry is by far the biggest choice that you'll ever make. And I think that whenever it comes to this super serious choice, we have to be careful. We need to be intentional and serious, because if you stay married, and that's the goal here, because marriage should be for life, you will spend the rest of your life living with them. If you don't, then you have the ugliness of divorce, you have the heartbreak, you have painful consequences that you're going to live with forever. And so who you marry is a huge decision, whether you stay married or not. And so it's extremely important that you find a right person for you, that you find the one that God has for you. And so I'm going to share with you 5 steps to finding the one. But before we get into that, if you find this type of content to be helpful, if you could give us a like or a rating, depending on what platform you're listening on, that helps this podcast reach a broader audience and to reach more people. And so with that being said, here's the first step. Number 1, you need to be the right one. So in other words, don't just look for the right one, become the right one. Because when you become the right one, then you're going to find the right one. And when you're the right one yourself, then the right one for you is going to find their way to you. You see, the closer you get to God, the closer you will get to the one that God has for you. Psalm 37:23 says, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way." And so what this verse shows is that if you stay close to God, and if you follow the steps that God orders for your life, then that special person that God has for you is going to come along. When you are the right one, you're going to find the right one. Here's what Psalm 84:11 and 12 says, "For the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord will give grace and glory. No good thing will he withhold from them that walk uprightly. O Lord of hosts, blessed is a man that trusteth in thee." And so the Bible gives us this promise that whenever you walk uprightly, God will withhold no good thing from you. You know, sometimes in relationships, we think that God is holding out on us. If a person's been single for a long time, they might think that God doesn't care about them, that God isn't giving them his best. But if you're walking uprightly, then no good thing will God withhold from you. And I think that there's a couple of possibilities here because sometimes God does withhold good things because we're not walking uprightly. Jeremiah 5:25 shows that God withholds good things from us whenever we're living in sin. It keeps good things from happening in our lives. But I will say that for the people who are walking uprightly and you're thinking that God is withholding something good from you, just be patient. Because that thing that might seem good to you, God might know that it's wrong. God might have something better for you. And it's so important that in relationships, whenever you're trying to find the one, you need to be the right one. I think that sometimes we make the mistake of putting all of our efforts into finding the one, and we don't really think very much about being the one. And I want to clarify here that you will also have to do some looking. If you want to be married and if you want to date, you need to put some effort into it. Don't expect for that person to just magically show up at your front door. No, you're going to have to pursue sometimes. Maybe you're a guy and the advice that you need to hear right now is ask her out. If you want to find the one, then you need to put yourself in a place where you will be able to find them. And I'll also say that you will attract the type of person that you are. If you're a spiritual person, you're going to attract a spiritual person. If you want a person who is in church, then you need to be in church yourself. If you're a person who's serving, then you will attract a person who also serves. If you're a nice person, you will attract nice people, and so on. You'll attract the type of person that you are. You know, people often say that opposites attract, but I think that that's really not often the case. But even whenever this is the case, they're not really completely opposite. And even if they have different personalities or different interests, they will still have similar values, or at least they should. So I think that we all have to realize that we attract the type of person that we are. So if you want for them to be kind, loving, forgiving, gracious, then be that type of person yourself. You will not attract the right person if you're the wrong person. You see, if there's somebody out there who is right for you, you have to consider to yourself, why would God give that person to somebody who's unworthy? You see, an ideal situation is a right person with a right person. And so if you're a wrong person, why would God give a right person to you? Why would God do that to that other person? You know, you can't pray for God's will while you're living in sin. The Bible shows us that our sins separate us from God. The Bible says that whenever we're living in unrepentant sin, then God won't hear our prayers. And so we shouldn't be asking God to bless our efforts while we're not doing our part. Don't think that God is going to introduce you to your future wife or your future husband if you haven't been living for Him. And so if you want to find the one, then you need to be godly. You need to be living for God. You need to love other people. You need to serve people. You need to pray. You see, finding the right spouse and finding the one that God has for you is not just about you finding them. It's about you becoming the right type of person yourself and then letting things work out. Because when you're the right person, then the right partner will come for you. Like if you're applying for a job, the act of finding the right job is not the entire thing. No, it's also about you being the best candidate, because you can look and apply and try to get interviews. But if you're not the right candidate, then it's just not going to work out. And I think that the same thing is true with relationships. It's not just about finding the one, but being the one. So number one, if you're going to find your future spouse, then you need to be the right one. Number two, you need to be serious. Whenever it comes to dating, it's sometimes said about a person that they have game, meaning that they're really good at talking to the opposite gender, they're really good at getting a boyfriend or a girlfriend, people love them. And I really think that this use of the word game is an accurate way of how many people view dating. Because I think that to a lot of people, dating is just a game. Many people date just for fun, but that's not dating the right way. Because dating is not just seeing who you can get. It's not just a way to not be lonely. It's not just a path to proving yourself worthy. Dating shouldn't be something that you just do for fun, even though dating can be fun. No, dating should only be done with the intent to marry. See, I think that a good attitude towards dating is that every date is a possible mate. You shouldn't date somebody unless you're being serious about it. And so you should only date if your end goal is marriage. If you have no intentions of marriage, then you just shouldn't date. Because the right purpose of dating is finding that future spouse. And so I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm trying to say here, because I'm not saying that you have to immediately know that you're going to marry that person. I'm not saying that you have to be confident that you'll marry them before you go out on the first date. But really what I'm saying here is that marriage should be the goal. And this is one of the reasons why I think that it's not best for teenagers to date. And that's a controversial belief, and I know that, and you don't really have to agree with me on that, but I just wouldn't really recommend dating while you're in high school. I wouldn't call it a sin. I wouldn't be super dogmatic about that, but I just don't think that it's best. It almost never works out. It brings problems into your life that you're not prepared for. Often teenagers who date make mistakes that they regret later. And so while I'm not really dogmatic about that, that's just my belief. And one of the reasons is because when you're at that age, then you're not prepared for marriage. Because remember, we should just date to marry. The purpose of dating is marriage. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think it's a good idea to date whenever you're really young. I mean, a 13-year-old isn't getting married anytime soon, so they shouldn't be dating. You know, in many ways, dating is kind of like shopping. And here's how. In shopping, you might have a list where you buy what you need and you get nothing more. But if you don't have a list, then you're going to get what you don't need, and you might forget what you do need. And I think that in dating, if you have a purpose, then you should only date with some serious intentions. But without a purpose and without a clear goal in mind, then you're going to get some wrong things, and you won't get the right things. You see, dating with no intent to marry the other person is like going shopping with no money. You leave frustrated and wishing for more, or you take something that doesn't belong to you. In shopping, some people are serious, they have a purpose, they are focused on just what they need, but some people just go for fun. They want the experience, they want the excitement. And in dating, you can be serious and have a purpose and have an end goal, but many people, whenever they date, they just want the benefits. They want that good feeling, they want some attention, they want to have a fun time, and this is really just a big mistake. You should be serious when you're in a relationship. The third thing that you need to do here is you need to be wise. Because as I said before, the person that you marry is the most important decision of your life outside of accepting Christ as Savior. Your choice in who to marry is more important than your career, where you go to college, where you live. It's more important than making a big purchase such as a house, and it's not even close. The person that you marry is such an important decision to make, and that's why it is incredibly foolish to rush this decision. It's dumb to not pray about it. You should be seeking godly counsel. You shouldn't be settling for the first person who accepts you. No, you need to be wise. Proverbs 4 tells us, "Get wisdom, get understanding, forget it not, neither decline from the words of my mouth. Forsake her not, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee." Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. And I find it interesting that the Bible's instructions are not just, don't sin. No, the Bible tells us to be wise. And so I think that in relationships, we shouldn't just be asking, is this wrong? We should be asking, is it best? We shouldn't just be settling for whoever. We should be waiting for the best, for the right person. Because we shouldn't just focus on not sinning or not ruining our lives. No, we should be doing what's best. We need to have some wisdom. And especially whenever we consider how important your relationship and your future marriage is. And if you want to have this kind of wisdom, then do what James 1:5 says. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. Sometimes we ask people for advice. We might go to friends or go to parents or other guys or girls. But really the best person to go to here is God. God is the greatest matchmaker. And I think that it's good to go to other people for counsel and for advice and for help, but none of those counselors can replace God. And I think that the wisdom of God is more important than personality tests, compatibility tests, other people's opinions. No, we need to place the emphasis on the will of God. And if we want God's will and if we want God's wisdom, then pray to him so that you can find his will. So in relationships and in dating, don't just ask, is this okay? Or would this be a sin? No, really consider to yourself, is it wise? Is it best? Don't settle for the first available person. No, be smart about it. Be patient and wait for somebody who's right. Don't just go for the lesser of two evils or just somebody who's okay. No, you need to be wise. The fourth thing that you need to do is to be selective. See, I really believe that you should have high standards for the person that you're going to date. You don't have to date the first person who's available or shows interest. You don't need to settle just because you don't want to be alone. No, you need to be selective. Now, I will say that your standards shouldn't be unreasonably high. Don't expect them to be perfect. Don't be unrealistic in your desires. But really, from what I've seen, I believe that a majority of people don't have high enough standards whenever it comes to dating. Because sometimes people ignore all of the red flags just because they want a relationship. Don't be with somebody that you're not excited about being with. Don't date a person that you have to try to fix or change. No, just wait for a right person. And if you're going to be selective and have some high standards, then patience is really important here. Wait for a person that you don't have to fix. Wait for a person who's worthy. So don't just settle. Don't get impatient and rush into the decision. No, be patient and selective. You need to have some higher standards in your life. And maybe this is uncomfortable to hear, but why would you want to be with somebody who's cheated on you? Why would you want to be with somebody who's disrespectful to you and who's always pushing your boundaries? Why would you want to date somebody who's lazy or who's addicted to pornography? Why would you settle for somebody who doesn't share your Christian beliefs? No, don't settle for somebody who isn't worthy. You need to have some high standards, and you need to be selective and have some good expectations. And when it comes to being selective and having some standards, I think that it's helpful to realize that some things are non-negotiable and others are negotiable. So I think that some non-negotiable things for every Christian should be, is this person saved? Are they truly following Jesus? Are they obedient to God and His Word? Do they have good character? Are they involved in church? I also think that attraction is non-negotiable. You need to find somebody that you're attracted to. There needs to be some good chemistry. You need to be able to get along well. And so we have some clear non-negotiable things that every Christian should expect. But on the other hand, we have some negotiable things. These things might be height, or their fashion, or their hair color, or their personalities. It could be their hobbies, or what sports they enjoy. And so we have some non-negotiable things and some negotiable things, or our needs and our wants. And you should realize that that other person will have some faults. You two are going to argue sometimes. There will be some disagreements, and they're going to have some imperfections. And that's okay. Just figure out what's negotiable and non-negotiable. Figure out what's a want and what's actually a need. And so whenever it comes to being selective, your standards should be attainable, but also high. So you shouldn't settle, you shouldn't tolerate the wrong person, and you shouldn't ignore the red flags. But you should also be sensible. You shouldn't expect perfection or be unreasonable. And then number 5, the last thing that you need to do if you're going to find the right one, and we talked about this a little bit already, but you need to be patient. Psalm 37:5 says, "Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass." I remember hearing a story about a guy who bought pizza with Bitcoin in 2010. And back in that time, Bitcoin wasn't very big, it wasn't super popular or known yet. And so this guy making the first ever transaction with Bitcoin, he used 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 large Papa John's pizzas. Now right now, at the time of the recording of this video, 1 Bitcoin is worth $64,000. And so 10,000 of them would be worth 640 million. I mean, think about that. That guy could have saved those Bitcoins and had 640 million right now, but because he used them a long time ago, he only got 2 pizzas out of it. I mean, what a sad story is that? He traded it in too soon. And maybe at the time it seemed like a good deal because it wasn't really worth much back then. But can you imagine the FOMO and regret of selling out too soon? Because if he had waited longer, he could have had so much more. And you know what? I think that the sad reality is a lot of people do this in dating. They settle too soon. They could have gotten somebody better. They could have had somebody more godly, somebody who treats them with more kindness and love, but they were impatient and they sold out too soon. You see, in dating, the who matters more than the when. It's better to find the right person later than the wrong person sooner. You know, if you were to get married a few years later in life, it wouldn't really make a big difference. Like if you got married at 28 instead of age 23, the entire big picture of your life would still look pretty much the same. But you know what? If you marry the wrong person, it will make a huge difference. You know, if you were to go to a restaurant, you would rather have the right meal on time than get the wrong meal early. Because if you got the wrong meal, it doesn't really help that it came early. And in dating, you shouldn't just settle for the wrong person. No, you should just wait for the right person in the right timing. And maybe for you, it doesn't feel like the right timing because you wanted to meet them yesterday, but we have to be patient. Maybe God will let you find the one in high school or in college, but maybe he won't. Maybe God's timing is a lot later than your timing. You might meet that person in your teens or in your 20s or in your 30s, but really nothing is guaranteed in the Bible. And so I encourage everybody who's listening to this who hasn't met the one yet to trust that whatever God has planned for you is better than what you've planned for yourself. I remember hearing a pastor once say that for college guys, you should be ashamed if you're not in a serious relationship by the time that you're a senior. And really, I strongly disagree. I think that culture and that mindset makes people rush things, it makes them be impatient, and it makes them often settle for the wrong person. And yeah, from a human standpoint, you would like to meet the one as soon as possible, but you know, in God's plan, he might introduce you to that person later than you would like. Proverbs 13:12 says, "Hope deferred maketh the heart sick, but when the desire cometh, it is a tree of life." You know, when that right person and that right relationship comes into your life, then the wait will be worth it. The right person is worth waiting for. And another thing about being patient and waiting, I would just encourage you, don't get married to a person that you don't know very well. You know, sometimes people will get married really quickly. And I realize that many couples do this, and sometimes it works out. And we could probably all think of a couple who got married way too soon, and yet it's still going well, and they're still happy. But just because it sometimes works out doesn't mean it's a good idea. Just because you know somebody who's done it doesn't mean that that will always be the case. And so even if you're in love, even if it feels right, even if you can't imagine living life without that person, don't rush into marriage. And I think that whenever it comes to the question of how long should we wait, it's really hard to put exact timelines on it, and situations can sometimes be different. But I'd say that for sure, I would not marry or get engaged to a person that I had known for less than a year. And I think that ideally, it's a lot longer than a year before you get engaged or married. And I would just encourage anybody who's listening to this, be patient and be willing to wait. And maybe right now you're discouraged because you haven't found the one yet. You're not dating and you wish that you were. And maybe you haven't even had a relationship yet. And even if you haven't had a relationship yet, that doesn't mean that you never will. And if you've had a couple of difficult breakups, that doesn't mean that you'll never have one that lasts. And so let me just tell you, don't get discouraged. Don't give up on God's timing. Don't settle for the wrong person. No, just be patient. Because the right person is out there for you, and you don't want to mess it up by rushing, by lowering your standards. And so those are 5 things that you need to do if you want to meet the one or to find your future spouse. Number 1, you need to be the right one. Number 2, you need to be serious. Number 3, you should be wise. 4, you should be selective. And then finally, be patient. Now, for more dating and relationship advice, here's a couple of episodes that will be relevant to you. And so with all that being said, thanks for watching and subscribe for more biblical teaching like this.